Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Unified Grand Prix play-ins. We just watched game number 1 of Revival versus Winthrop, and Revival, of course, going to take that, but we have some words of wisdom for you in a moment. Just a quote that came up to us. The secret lies in confusing the enemy so that he cannot fathom our real intent. Sun Tzu, Art of War, Winthrop Esports 2021. Just got to throw that one at you before we start up for match number 2.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that Winthrop are very aware of the fact that that was a very confusing game for a lot of people to watch at home. But, some of the things that we do got to focus on, we've already talked about how we want to see Revival drafting a little bit more early game so they can actually do some of these plays that they were trying to make. But the other big thing we want to focus on is the fact that Winthrop did a fantastic job at being very proactive with their trades. They weren't panicking whenever Revival would send 3 members to one side or the other. And as you said during the break, Eric, whenever we saw the camera on Revival, we always had to have the LeBlanc, by the way, Aatrox, by the way, because they were hitting an objective on the far side of the map every single time.
If we're hyping up Winthrop, we also got to hype up Doxa, because at the end of the day, what that game taught me, Doxa is a good player. That LeBlanc was a thing of beauty. He went 3-0 very, very early and just would not stop the momentum, would not stop the aggressive plays. And of course, a lot of this put on the back of the rest of his squad. Saskio, some of the most beautiful super mega death rockets I've ever seen. Overall, they were a collective unit, but one of the ones that actually stood out to me that I did want to talk about a little bit was Kenji. Because Kenji, those were some kind of scuffed hooks from time to time, but when he did find them, they were impactful hooks.
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite one that kind of highlights this is he was always willing to make the plays. He was always willing to do things. And when he pulls Thresh back over the wall after Thresh flashes out, trying to throw the lantern behind him so that they can both effectively, just use one flash to escape, and Kenji's like, nah, you come right on back here. It didn't end up necessarily working out, but the fact that he's got the confidence to actually go for these plays is huge. You can't necessarily train people to have a killer instinct, but you can teach people who have the killer instinct to temper it and only go for higher percentage plays.
I mean, he missed the hooks you don't take. Wayne Gretzky /Freak/ whoever else decided to say that quote. But
thank you, Michael Scott.
Michael Scott as well. A list of quotes, a quote chain going on. But Revival now. Revival is what I want to talk about, because this time they have selected red side, and something historically we've seen about Revival is they are a team that highly prioritizes a counter pick, especially if they can get it for Sudsy.
Yeah, we saw, as Kelsey was talking about on the analyst desk, they looked like they might have been a little bit afraid of the fact that Doxa could just blind the victor against them. They weren't necessarily playing around it, and because of that, they didn't necessarily have an opportunity to find themselves a counter pick, and they opted to picking up the Azir for Sudsy, which is, in all honesty, a very strong champion, but it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of early proactivity that we often like to see. I mean, if you just look back through his match history, you look at things like the Yone, the Twisted Fate, the Tristana, the Nico, that all have a lot of opportunities to be aggressive in the first couple of levels due to their impactful spells. And I hope to see something a little bit more like that now that he actually gets to get his counter pick in this match.
Yeah, I definitely hope to see more of that. And when it comes to the draft, I definitely hope to see something that's much more focused on the early game from their whole team. Because we talked about how much this early game means for Revival. The feast or famine, we've harped on it way too much at this point, but it is true to a T. You saw it with that last bit. Revival just couldn't get their footing when they had something that scaled as well as the Azir. It doesn't matter if you don't have the early game to back you up. So draft, being red side, could favor them for the counter pick, but we need to see the rest of the draft be early game oriented as well, at least mid game oriented at the very minimum.
Yeah, and I want to see a little bit more cognizance paid to the bans that you're going for, especially in the second half, right? We talked a little bit about the Gnar ban between you and I, Eric, about this thing that, kind of makes sense because Gnar's a good champion, and if you're expecting that Hybrids is going to be a stronger top lane, it's going to be a very strong pick for him. But if you're going to be picking something like the Malphite anyway, Malphite is a fantastic matchup into the Gnar. So, you got to be very cognizant of what you're trying to do. And now, I kind of forgot about this champion. Rel, very, very strong. Looking to be coming out for Revival. Kugayama had some pretty decent hooks as this Thresh. Unfortunately, there was just no damage to follow it up.
Yeah, so Rel locked in, speeding through this draft already. Udyr and Hecarim take excuse me, taken off the map as we're not going to see that 5 bans towards the jungle like we did see last time. So a lot less focus going on there. That's going to proc the Olaf first pick coming out of Winthrop. But the response, we talked about the Rel already. Now it's going to be the Graves.
Yeah, and with Revival up against the wall, remember, this could be their last game in the entire Unified Grand Prix, whereas Winthrop, if they win, they're going into the double elimination. They have a little bit more of a buffer, so they can be more experimental later on, but now is the time to really show everything you can. You can't afford to be hiding picks at this point, so I'm excited to see how Revival want to go about it, now that the Senna has been picked up by the side of Winthrop, and we're going to see Saskio play it instead of Scooped bringing it out.
Well, that does leave the Jinx on the table. It also leaves that very, very spicy Kai'Sa we've been talking about on the table as a response pick to come out of Revival. Ooh. Winthrop, on the other hand, they've already locked in the Senna. Now they're going to back it up with the Tahm Kench getting locked in, of course. Tahm Kench, the Catfish, does many, many brilliant things when it comes to keeping your ADC safe, as well as really locking down some of the other enemies you might be chasing down.
Yeah, we'll have to see how well Revival can actually noodle as Catfish. Does it? Wait, do you know that joke, Eric? You know what noodling is?
I know it, yeah, with your finger.
All right, cool. Yeah. So for everyone else, we'll get back. I feel like I have to explain this. Noodling is a thing where you put your hand like in a hole in the river, and you get a catfish to bite your finger, and then you use that to just pull it out. And because catfish don't really have teeth, unlike Tahm Kench, who has really big chompers, you're able to just go fishing just by putting your hand in some holes, and it ends up working out. Anyway, we'll get back to more important things later. Right now, we have some League of Legends to talk about because we see this double marksman coming out from Revival, and this time they have a little bit more early proactivity that they can play around between the Rel and the Grey, so I'm already liking this draft a whole lot better.
Yeah, and the Kai'Sa. The Kai'Sa's a big thing. We talked about how much Saskio likes it. Well, it's not just Saskio, it's Scooped as well. Sabers adamantly talked about how much Scooped really does like that Kai'Sa pick and how much he goes for that priority. So it's very, very comfortable champion for him. As we do head into the second phase of the draft, Azir will be the first champion removed over on the side of Revival. Shen getting removed by Winthrop, all meanwhile.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see what else they want to be banning away from Doxa, right? Doxa also has a very large champion pool that he can pull from. Not quite as large as what we've seen from Sudsy, but he's not the same kind of counter-picking kind of player. I wouldn't be surprised if with this Syndra ban, Doxa ends up picking the Victor for themselves just because of how powerful it is and how easily it can do so much damage and just kite away from things like this realm. So we'll see what they end up doing, especially now that Revival does have counterpick, and they can kind of expect that Doxa might be going towards something like the Victor.
And with that counterpick priority, you know this next pick isn't going to be the mid lane because the bans are very heavily targeted towards the mid lane. They want to take away as many answers that Winthrop can think of that might put a wrench in Sudsy's situation. But meanwhile, Revival are going to hover over the Scion for the meanwhile before they go for that mid lane counterpick. We'll see if they gets locked in and what Winthrop have as a response.
I do like this Scion quite a bit. It's going to be playing towards concept of X strengths. He's going to have a little bit more proactive early power. Scion has a lot more early laning power than the Malphite does. You simply sit there, you charge up your Q, slam it down, and suddenly, hey, you got priority in the lane. Easy as cheese. Anyway, we got the Zed hovered once again for the Doxa. I'm not expecting this to come out. Yeah, you can have some kind of cheesy picks, but when you don't have the counter pick to grab something like that, it's a little bit scary. Instead, opting towards the Orianna, and now I really want to see some kind of ball delivery system, because so far you're going to be kiting back pretty consistently, but we'll see what the Hybrids wants to pick up into this Scion.
I mean, in a way, you can kind of have Olaf as a ball delivery, but it's definitely not optimal. Going for the more aggressive lane instead, you're going to have the Aatrox, and paired with the Olaf, that's a lot of aggression. That's a lot of skirmish aggression. It's a lot of neutral objective power over on that top side.
Yeah, do you remember this top lane, this Aatrox versus Scion? I think it was like every single game of Season 8, I want to say. So we're pretty used to seeing this. Ooh, okay, interesting. All right, hovering through a bunch of different options right now is Sudsy. He's got the Victor that he's currently hovering. He was looking at the Anivia as well as the Zoe, and it is going to end up being the Victor. So We'll see how this ends up going as the champions start to get traded around, because one of the big things that we've been seeing with characters like this Olaf that Winthrop has locked for themselves is that it is very strong in the early game, but if it doesn't have an opportunity to snowball through, can end up becoming kind of useless against the amount of raw damage that Revival is currently showing for themselves between double marksman and the Graves and the Kaisa, as well as the insane damage that can come out from Sudsy's Victor.
Yeah, Olaf can do great things in the early game, but that's really what he is. I mean, he falls off nonetheless. He's Olaf.
Yes.
Once he gets to the late game, like you're really relying on the true damage of Reckless Swing, and that's not really going to give you too much on a damage front. It's all about the disruption at that point. But if you can get that early lead, I mean, you do have the Orion and Aatrox that can go ahead and catapult you through that mid game. However, Revival, I was talking about the skirmish of having that duo of Aatrox and Olaf. Let's talk about the overall skirmish of Revival, because it is gorgeous once you start going for those neutral objective fights, especially if you go towards the bot side and you start having these dragon fights, having the power of the Rel as well as the Kaisa there, and of course Graves, a very potent, powerful jungler. It does have a lot of bot side strength coming out of that squad.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how they're able to play it, because unlike last game where I was really worried about their ability to even play for the first 15 minutes of the game, I feel like they've got a real chance throughout this one. And so, as I said, I don't think this is going to be the kind of series where it's going to be a total blowout, but Revival has been so coin flippy throughout this entire thing. They're so feast or famine in the way that their mid jungle 2v2s often play out, that this game will either look very, very good for them or very, very bad is my expectation.
It's been rough. They came into the scene as major underdogs, and they've definitely transcended a lot of expectations. But when you have matches like this against Winthrop, this is where you definitely need to show up. This has to be the recoup for Revival to be able to stay in the Unified Grand Prix and continue whatever success they can find, because big names have gone down at the hands of Revival. This, you don't want this to be the end right here.
Yeah, I think they have the power to do it. It is going to be all on them to actually show they are able to play through this entire thing. I can't wait to see how they end up playing this Victor, right? Because we keep talking about how Doxa loves to play this champion. He's been very, very good at it. He's been prioritizing it a lot more than other mid laners. And, we often talk about the fact that if you know how to play a champion, you know what that champion doesn't like. You know how to bully them around, because you're just like, oh, well, when my opponents did this to me, I was not really able to do anything about it. So we'll see if the matchup familiarity coming in from the side of Doxa versus Sudsy is going to play a difference, because, again, we do have such a strong 2v2 coming up from both teams.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, Sudsy is a very expensive player. He's been in the amateur scene for quite some time now. And we did talk about that Champion Ocean, but this is something he opted into. He wanted that Victor pick to go into Doxa. So he is doing this with quite a bit of confidence. And again, Revival is a counter pick oriented squad. This is how they love to draft. They love to get stuff for Sudsy. So it does spell some good things for them on the horizon in terms of comfort. But we are ready to finally get into the game. Unified Grand Prix play-ins, Revival versus Winthrop, game number 2. It's now on your screen, and it's now underway.
All right, interesting. Already a level 1 invade coming out for Revival, getting some vision down, and is not quite matched from the side of Winthrop. Winthrop only get a really shallow ward here, but we'll see Frost Forest still has his red trinket. It is going to recognize, like, hey, we didn't see anybody over the top side of the map. They probably threw some wards down at my red buff. So if I can clear that out, get a little bit of EXP, maybe give a little bit of it to my solo laner in the mid lane, and allow them to hit level 2 off the first wave, which is not as impactful in the mid lane, but is incredibly important if it ever goes to the top side.
And so important is this game right now. Just taking a look at the grand scope of things, because this is the play-ins. You're not officially in yet, and it weighs heavily on Revival. I talked about those upsets they had. I mean, it was EGP as well as Maryville University have been upset at the hands of Revival. To lose at Winthrop would be like a pretty sad statement for them after having such promising performances.
Yeah. I also want to draw your attention to one other thing before we talk a little bit more about the greater meta of the Tier 1, Tier 2 Proving Grounds, is the fact that Cyber is opting to go for the Ignite on this Graves. And, this is a very interesting choice that we often see come out from this character, specifically in the Olaf matchup, because without the Ignite, you're not really able to duel the Olaf ever. You have to just run away whenever you happen to be in the same spot as this brutal Viking. With the Ignite, suddenly instead of being like a 20-80 kind of fight, you're suddenly looking at a 45-55 kind of fight. It's not going to allow you to win the matchup consistently, but it allows you to not be bullied all the time, and you can actually be on the same side of the map as the Olaf. But it does, as we say that, it does mean that you're going to be much less safe later on in the game. So you do have to find some kind of advantage earlier on, and we've already talked about the fact that Revival, with some early power now, can look to do that.
And Joshi, I've always been like really, really fond of the Olaf. Whenever I do play League, I gotta hold that thought because we do gotta look at what this Olaf is doing over in the top side. Gets a lot of damage onto Concept of X and burns his flash all meanwhile, but that's kind of a reason why right there. He is a very relentless, sticky champion, but he feels so good in 1v1s, Joshi. When you get low and you pop that W and your passive is ticking, that attack speed goes up, the life steal is there, and your opponent can't figure out why your health bar is going no more lower. It feels great in the early to be able to get those 1v1s, and that Ignite is such a clever response from Saber.
Yeah, we'll see if he's able to find anything with it. He is a little bit faster in this early clearing, but he's not necessarily going to be finding a whole lot of advantage off of that alone. Frost Forest, now in his own side of the jungle, still has an opportunity to clear out all of his camps here, and Cyber is just going to need to finish clearing out his own side. So small advantage, very small advantage going Cyber's way, but it is basically nullified by the fact that this early gank up in top lane gives Hybrids a lot more freedom to push his lane opponent around. And we saw by the 11-minute mark, 40 CS differential between Hybrids and Concept of X. If he can do that again, it's a really good argument for continuing to see this team later on in the tournament.
So teleports being matched in the mid lane, and not too much have come of it just yet. I mean, you are getting a lot of push to come out of Doxa to keep some lane control into this matchup that Sudsy opted into. And that early priority does suit really, really well for Frostforce. I mean, we talked about Olaf being that early neutral objective champion. When you get early lane priority, it makes it that much easier to get those early neutrals.
Yeah, we'll see how effective he is able to do this. They're both invisible. Kuga might be in a wrong spot.
Ooh, Kuga trying to run away, and he will be able to hop over and get to safety, but a little bit of threat there coming out of the bot lane of Winthrop.
Yeah. All right, other interesting thing right now, Eric, we see top lane Hybrids once again opting to pick up the Cole. He is very confident in his ability to play this lane out. He is not worried whatsoever about the fact that Concept of X now playing a stronger early game champion. He thinks he's going to be able to win it anyway. So we gotta pay attention to how that ends up playing out. He does lose some of his CS lead by backing at an inopportune time, but he should be in a spot where he will have an opportunity to fight a little bit later on.
Ooh, Sudsy getting a little bit of trading in, but Doxa's still feeling that early momentum, and I don't blame him for it. But meanwhile, in the top lane, Concept of X trying to run away. But again, as you said it, there is no flash. A flash has to be used. Hybrid's getting a little too cocky there. He still gets the kill nonetheless.
Yeah, this should also be a Dragon getting picked up from the side of Revival. The back coming through at a time when Revival had already fixed theirs means that they will be first to this Dragon. No flash from Frost Forest means that at best they maybe pick up Kugayama, but instead just going to have to walk away. Frost Forest, I don't think you can find this.
Time to back off, buddy. Not willing to go for that one. Kuga will be able to slip away, but early momentum going for Winthrop with the first blood, but at the end of the day, Revival are doing something different this time. They got a neutral objective. They have 0 last time. They were able to grab the mountain.
Yeah, this is going to be really good for the side of Revival, not necessarily because it's going to be giving them a whole lot of big resistances. I say this over and over again, your individual dragons don't necessarily matter a whole lot. You get a little bit of extra survivability being provided by the armor and magic resist, but realistically, it's just counting up to 4. You're basically just pretending you're Jhin every single game. If you can ever count to 4, hey, you're suddenly in a much better spot to win the game. But this Mountain Dragon means that it's going to be a lot harder for for Winthrop to actually get all the way to 4 because they are already 5 minutes behind the curve that they would normally be looking at with the early power that the Olaf does provide.
Now, I do want to provide a little bit of a counter example to that because we are in a pause right now, so we are going to take a little bit of time to talk about stuff. But Revival did have that matchup before against C9A. And one of the things that popped out about that matchup was the Mountain Drake. It was something I personally casted, and it was surprising to see how impactful a Mountain Drake can get when you see the health bars of the other team all blinking red and realizing if they didn't have that extra defense, That would be it right there. That would be the end. So sometimes these small little stat boosts do mean a lot when it comes to these matchups.
Yeah, I mean, you oftentimes see them, right? Every single time we look at one of these big item or objective markers, you're looking at whether or not it is a breakpoint, right? Does that 2 extra armor mean that you're going to stay alive because it mitigated 5 damage over the course of the team fight? Then great. If that's what it takes, then you are probably going to win the team fight anyway. But now we're at a spot where we're seeing another fight, and the Glacial Augment coming out from Saskia, just brutal for these champions to deal with. Rella is already a fairly slow character, and losing even more of that movement speed is not very fun.
But you can see the type of trades you can get from the Kaisa. Saskia getting a little too cocky there. It loses half his health in the process.
Nice.
A Shockwave. The mid lane used onto Sudsy. It will not land. So Sudsy able to stay alive. But all that being said, that means that Sudsy has no flash. He's not one of the most mobile of champions. And Olaf loves sticking onto champions that don't exactly have a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yeah, so, okay. All right, this is a situation where we were talking about it last time I was casting with Marek. If you are going to be getting these flashes, you need to do something with that. It is not enough to get the flash and be like, aha, we have found our advantage. No, you need to instead go for these counter ganks, and Frost Forest is here on time.
Ooh, Cyberverse is Frost Forest going off, and Cyber's going to be able to win that one. Takes down his own enemy jungler off the counter gank, and it was beautifully played right there, knowing exactly where Frost would be.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that we were going to talk about in just a moment, right? It makes the play very obvious that Winthrop are going to be trying to go for, and Cyber on this Graves with the Ignite suddenly has an opportunity to win these trades versus Frost Forest. Olaf, beautiful smoke screen, limits his ability to fight back, and they're going to reward themselves with the Rift Herald. So Revival already showing a massive difference between Game 1 and Game 2, simply off of the fact that Cyber is reading the map incredibly well.
Revival finding a kind of revival of their own as they head over towards the top side with this Rift Herald, not looking to put down Shelly just yet towards that tower. Instead, the counter jungling coming out of Cyber, able to deny as many resources as he can from Frost Forest, and it's extremely impactful to be able to deny this from Olaf. I mean, he gets a lot of tanky stats, he has a lot of natural true damage, but once you take those stats away early, he does suffer. He does suffer a lot in the mid game.
Yeah, and one of the big things, you know, that one of the other analysts that you'll end up seeing a little bit more throughout this entire Proving Grounds, Miyamo Big D was the one who is credited with saying, hey, when you start counter jungling in this new jungle, it feels awful because suddenly, you know, you were getting a little bit less income than you were before, and when that is cut in half because you're starting to lose a ton. Oh, are we going to see the deer again? Oh, okay, not quite, but but when you start losing half of your already reduced income, it's going to be absolutely brutal to start putting Frost Forest behind. Now he's trying to find a counter jungle with both of his solo winners in tow.
Seen invade over towards this blue side.
Yeah, they gotta leave.
Instant retreat, but here comes Concept of X, and there's the Ragnarok. That was beautiful right there. Knowing exactly how to block that.
Yeah, there's a lot of players who, even as that Olaf, would not have blocked it for the rest of their team. They would have just moved to the side and dodged, because that's the natural reaction people have, right? Hey, skill shot coming in, I don't want to get hit by that. I'm going to step away, but Frost Forest, playing for his team, ends up blocking that and making sure that the engage means absolutely nothing. So they don't get the blue buff, but they all get away with their lives.
Look at all this pressure going on in the top side. Revival are going to try and match it on the bot side and get some turret plates of their own. Concept of X does show up, but there's not really much he can do here. He does get a knockup in. Tower's starting to run very, very critically low. He needs to be able to clear this wave to stop the first brick and buy time for the bot. And he might have bought enough right there. Rift Herald does come out. Kind of forgot they had it, and that's going to be first brick going over to Revival.
Yeah, and this is normally, you know, this is a situation where, Jesus, Saskia going so low. But when you don't feel like you can contest a dragon, this is what the normal play is, right? You move to the other side of the map and you try and make a play in order to get more gold for your team. But losing out on that turret interaction means that they aren't even winning in the gold trade. In fact, they just give over this dragon effectively for free. And so Revival, with the early power that they've had, with their willingness to fight before people have one item, is going to be looking really, really good. Now that will change as the game goes on. Yeah, Revivals scale well, but the increased range that Senna is going to have and the ability for Doxa to play from a long ways away is going to limit a lot of Revivals' opportunities to go for these fights. So I really like the fact that they are picking up these objectives now, so it is easier to start coin flipping dragons later if you need to.
Josh, if you want to talk what feels bad, you were saying it earlier with Dylan's comments on getting counter jungled. Well, Revival do it surgically when they take control of the quadrant of the map. You saw right there. They just took that Drake, they instantly sent Sudsy over to the Raptors, they send Scooped over to the Golems, and they just clear out whatever they can for Frost. They're really intent on putting this Olaf as far behind as they can.
Yeah, and he's, he's behind slightly, right? He's 0-1-0, but he's less than half a camp behind at this point. So they're doing a good job at picking it up, and we will see this lead likely continue to grow as Frost Forest feels like he needs to be aggressive more and more before he starts to fall off, because the Gore Drinker does not feel as good as it used to, right? It got a lot of its percentage healing cut out. It is calculated differently, and so now we'll see if Frost Forest can be relevant, but he's walking into people.
Walking in. Fight not going to break out, though. Not willing to pull the trigger just yet. Hybrids walking past the minion wave, but it's ill-advised at this point. You don't want to take that fight, especially denying Hybrids that much of a minion wave if you do go through with it and don't get a kill.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the reward for fighting that, even if they successfully find that fight, they don't necessarily get a whole lot off of it, right? This is a Scion, by the way, situation where on the opposite side of the map, he would be able to take down that entire turret. But we see this very interesting gold graph coming out. Scooped, Cyber, Sudsy, all a little bit ahead of the curve, whereas all the members of Winthrop, because their gold is coming out significantly through some of these neutral objectives and farming, and also the fact that it's, fasting Senna, they aren't farming. In fact, it's farming Tom Kench. They are very equal across the board.
I just really, really want to commend Frost for somehow keeping his CS up. I mean, with the amount of counter jungling that's going on from Revival, pretty much anytime they walk away, they go for a counter jungle. Now they're looking for Sudsy. Sudsy gets caught, knocked up again. Too sticky is Saskio, as Concept of X is going to be the one caught. The train is going to stop. The dinner bell was rung the wrong way. It's going to Concept of X, who's going to fall, and it's going to be 2 kills going over to Winthrop, as Concept of X zombie just walks around before it expires. Winthrop finding their footing in this map.
He got a grass proc at the end. It's all worth. Eric, it's all worth. At the very end, got one more grass proc, got like that extra 5 HP for the rest of the game. But no, that was... We didn't see the setup for it, but the result is very bad for Revival, right? We keep praising them for their ability to play early on in the game, and they are up 2 dragons. But now they're down a little more than 1,000 gold at this point. And it doesn't sound like a lot, right? But they're the team that needs to be looking for a lot of these plays, because the Kraken Slayer are going to be coming out soon for Saskio. He's going to start doing a lot of consistent damage throughout these entire fights. And both Aatrox and Olaf going to be very, very difficult to kill coming up, because while they have Grievous Wounds on Concept of X, they're not going to be hitting this Scion. They're going to be hitting the backline, and they're going to be healing all of the raid clear amount that they would normally be anyway.
But always keep that close eye on that Ignite. It's available, and it's going to be great for a lot of these fights to stop that healing. Now, Revival on the map. They're going straight for that Rift Herald. They still want to keep their neutral objective control, and they're going to maintain it. Something they definitely need to keep their footing in this game, as the gold lead did swing, as you said earlier, about 1k in favor of Winthrop. Now recovery mode for Winthrop as they try to just let this game play out a little bit longer before they really start taking control of the map and getting their forward vision.
Yeah, and they're, again, continuing to make some of these money plays. They're not playing for the neutral objectives. They are playing to take turrets. They're playing to get the gold on their own team, and that's why you see Frost Forest, he picks up the blue buff, and Hybrid's down here. He's trying to hit the structure, but it's hard, right? It's very difficult for him to do that with the fact that Concept X can just start wailing on him and clears the minions very, very quickly. Oh, this is an ultimate coming in from Kenji. What do they find? Nothing.
They found a stroll through the jungle. That's what they found.
This ward, we got it. We needed 3 people here to clear it.
Bot lane ADC duo just hold hands, have a good time. COVID gets you lonely, man.
Yeah. Okay. Teleport coming out. All right, I like this proactive teleport from Hybrids, actually, right? The dragon's about to spawn with every single member of Revival coming out of base. It would normally be an opportunity for Winthrop to just start hitting it, but they might be a little bit late if they just try and start burning it now if Revival wanted to come. But Revival just say, hey, we think you've been hitting this for the past couple of seconds already. There's no way we get there in time, and Winthrop are rewarded for their little bit of extra greediness. They find themselves their own dragon for the game, and now as Revival is halted at only 2 dragons, it's going to be a little bit easier for Winthrop to actually play for some kind of soul, or even just try to deny the soul later on.
Yeah, it's stuffing a potential win condition that Revival can have, and when it comes to the late game, Revival do tend to slip up there. They need those very, very strong leads early on, so stopping those win conditions from coming to fruition is definitely part of the game plan for Winthrop in the early game. As they still try and get some control of their map, they're really struggling with that right now. You can see a lot of forward row vision coming out of Revival. A lot of it. I mean, look at the blue side jungle, the red side jungle. It's starting to get lit up like Christmas. You got one deep control ward going in, a tri-bush ward as well. They're trying to keep tracks on the movement of Winthrop so they don't give up too much in the early.
Yeah. Interesting thing, I want to again pull attention to the bottom lane gold discrepancies, right? Saskio is sitting about 1,500 gold down against Scooped, but Kugiyama, similar deficit compared to Kenji on this Tom Ken. She's going to be very, very strong, right? Look at that. 1,000 gold in favor of Kenji on this Tom Ken. She's going to be way tankier and going to be hitting a lot of these power spikes much earlier than this Rel would. So he is going to be much tankier, much better able to withstand some of these aggressions. And as they see Concept X like starting to move over, you're also noticing he's pretty significantly behind his lane opponent. He's been trying to play for the team, but not necessarily able to find any good engages thus far in the game.
So a little far forward is Hybrid right here. I'm not sure if he got caught out. You can see the response looking to come in. Concept of X and Cyber are both walking towards that area, but the wards are there to make sure that he doesn't get caught out, so Hybrids will be able to walk away. But Winthrop are starting to show their hand there. They do have that split pushing menace that is the Aatrox, and trying to keep that wave locked in. But all meanwhile, take a look at the top side. Ghost is popped, and Frost Force going hard on the charge for Sudsy. As Sudsy tries to run away, Ragnarok's going to be popped. The Reckless Swings come in, as well as the axes. Here comes the Shockwave, and there goes the kill. Frost Forest able to grab it.
For what do they lose for this? This is what we praise Winthrop for. Whenever there is a play on the opposite side of the map, Winthrop are able to find some kind of objective. Right now, they might get some damage on the mid lane turret.
Ooh, they're looking for the fight, actually. There comes the ultimate. Going to be able to be devoured by Kenji, who will save his top laner. But
reinforcements.
Now more members of Winthrop are starting to come up. Cyber's starting to run really low, and so is Scooped, but Hybrids will be the one to fall over on the side of Winthrop. It's now retreat for Revival. The health bars are blinking, blinking, blinking lower. More axes go through. Finds it onto Kuga. Kuga will not escape and will fall. That's a kill going over to Saskio and Winthrop. Even though they lost one, even though it looked like Revival's fight, Winthrop are still able to find a way in.
Yeah, so overall, I mean, again, that's just an extra kill going in favor of Winthrop as we see both these AD carriers starting to do a ton of damage. And obviously, mid laners weren't there. They didn't necessarily participate in that last fight. But we got to pay attention to how Revival is moving around the map in response to the things that Winthrop are doing. Because so far, Winthrop showed that they were very proficient at that. Revival, while they are still very much in this game, it's less than 1,000 gold between these two teams. They still got to be very careful. If they can be proactive with some of these trades, they're going to be finding a lot more gold and suddenly way better able to start playing a lot of these mid-game team fights. And I think they can do it, but we're a bit past the mid-game. We're starting to see second items being built by a number of members, and that just means that these team fights are going to start becoming a lot more decisive, regardless of who wins them.
And honestly, when it comes to Revival, the thing I've been noticing about them more than anything else is they love to fight. They just really love to fight. Like, fighting around the world is who they tend to be. They go all out in these fights, but it's never when it's opportune for them. This is what we keep falling into. Like, you can fight all you want, but you need to build a lead that actually gets you some kind of tangible advantage where you can come out ahead in these leads. That's what Winthrop are really good at. They keep playing this game very passively. They get the neutrals, and they slowly build a gold lead over time. Now, they're just starting to win it through fights.
Yeah, something that is very relevant to what you were saying is because of all these fights and the way that the gold has been distributed, Winthrop's front line is way stronger than the front line Revival. Concert of X, unfortunately, very, very poor in this game. Whereas Frost Forest, Hybrids, and Kenji relatively accelerated, so they are able to face check a lot of these areas where they don't have vision. They are able to walk in, and this would be a very bold Baron attempt if that's what Revival are trying to opt for, trying to convince Winthrop that they are going to be hitting this Baron. But there's a Scuttle Crab there. They're not going to be able to make that bluff, and this should be Winthrop picking up their second dragon of the game.
I mean, Revival are kind of spending way too much time here. They are going to show part of their hand. You do have
They're hitting. They're hitting.
Kuga coming up, and now they're actually going to start it up. This could be dangerous for Revival. I don't know if they're far enough ahead to really do too much about this.
Oh, and teleport from Hybrids going top.
You also got to consider the tools that are coming out from Winthrop. If you find a Shockwave clean, you got to watch Doxa. He goes for it. He finds the Shockwave, but down goes the Baron. Revival are able to pick it up, and they're going to pick up Hybrids as well. But here comes the charge. The train comes in. 1 kill going through. Concept of X going to use that zombie mode to get an extra damage as the Ragnarok comes out to speed on through and find himself some safety. But it's a 1-for-1 trade. Overall, Revival, they play it very carefully, and ultimately they're rewarded with the Baron.
Yeah, I'm so surprised that Revival were willing to pull that off. They did it on vision. All of Winthrop knew where they were. Revival were still able to pick up the Baron after that and only trade 1-for-1. Hybrids had to teleport to the far side of the map, but we'll get to see this once again. And pay attention to the way that Hybrids in particular plays out this fight. He's going to be teleporting up to the top side of the map in order to try and find a flank, but by the time he gets there, Baron is already gone, and he tries to find this big fight in order to get onto the backline, but he gets instantly blown up. Look at where Frost Forest is. He was still hitting the dragon, and by the time he goes down, the only person who is dead is Concept of X, and it's partly because he is unfortunately so weak in this game that he doesn't have the defensive stats to stand up to the rest of the damage that Winthrop University are able to provide.
A smart play to come out of Revival will now put the Baron buff into their hands. The question is, what can they do with it? Can they start taking these towers down? We need to see more falls, especially the mid lane tower. It's denying too much vision from them, and as we come back from replay, hey, it's gone. So now we're seeing what we need to see from Revival. Now they can start pushing that vision forward, and now we can start to see their team comp come to fruition.
I'm still a bit worried, though, right? Like, you have this Senna who's continuing to scale. You have Orianna who is going to continue scaling, and well, yeah, the Aatrox and Olaf will be a little bit past their prime relatively soon. It is so difficult to deal with this backline that Winthrop have put together. And while Sudsy is here in the top lane, there might be an opportunity for an engage, but their engage tools are so weak.
But you'd still have the ultimate from the Kench as Hybrids goes right after Sudsy, but it's Hybrids who's taking most of the damage. The flash comes out of Sudsy. You're not going to find much else other than a full retreat coming out of Winthrop. Over the wall comes Cyber. Here comes the Shockwave. Pulls Cyber back in, and Cyber will fall. 1-for-0 trade so far in favor of Winthrop, and the Baron Siege starts to go wrong for Revival, but on the back end, they still grab a tower in the mid lane.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be all they get from the Baron, which is good, right? They get a couple of structures off of that. They're going to continue giving themselves opportunities to end the game later. But they got to be very careful right now because they are still down a member. But we touched on this, like we said, like maybe they can go for some kind of aggressive play here, but they weren't able to go for it because they don't have any proactive crowd control. Right? Like, how are you going to catch the members of Revival? You need a flank from Hybrids, which he tried to do up at the Baron and instantly got blown up, or you just need to catch somebody with repeated axes from Frost Forest, and realistically, that's about it. You got to take your opponents by surprise, and when you're running at them up one of these lanes, not exactly surprising.
You saw that gold graph right there. It's been swinging back and forth quite a bit, but never really goes past that 2K mark. So this game is on a knife's edge. That's to say for sure. Winthrop are trying to passively keep in this, but Revival, they're kind of finding the killer instinct. They're just not finding the coordination.
Yeah. Teamfight timer is almost up. Eric, we got 1 minute left until the next Cloud Dragon is up. And, well, the Cloud Dragon itself would be nice, right? You want to give yourself the opportunity to play for the Cloud Soul relatively soon and have the extra movement speed that it provides. I think the team fight is going to be mattering quite a bit more, so we've got to pay attention to what items people are on, how strong they are, and who can actually win this team fight. And right now, you see a couple of major items coming out for every single member. Almost everyone is on 2 items, but the one major exception, Saskia, not going to be getting his second item before this fight starts, and that could be incredibly impactful.
We'll see what it leads to, as there's 25 seconds left on this Dragon timer, and 25 seconds left on a potential team fight. Cyber will jump over the wall. It's been damage to Frost, and use the collateral damage as well to be able to get away from that. I think he was too afraid, knowing that he doesn't have Flash. He took Ignite instead, but that's an ult down.
Yeah. I actually really like it, right? Not having the Flash means you can't take these risks that you normally would be able to and just kind of speculate as to how the fight's going to be going, but we're going to see Revival just push up the mid lane. They have the inside track, and now Winthrop needs to try and find something. They're sending Olaf to hit the Dragon?
Sending Olaf back. You still have the Shockwave if Revival pair up a little bit too much here, but Revival, they got a strong priority on this, and Winthrop, they look like they're going to be happy just giving up their inhibitor. I'm not sure about this call right here. You're giving up priority on your base, and that is inhibitor going to fall. But here comes the Shockwave. Here comes the engage. Revival are on full forward aggression as they continue to dismember the members of Winthrop and destroy this team fight. You have it right there. Doxa's down. Saskio's down, Kenji's down, Nexus towers are going down. What was the call there? Winthrop fighting tooth and nail to keep their base alive, but the health bars are getting deleted. Revival, they needed a response. Here it is, Joshi. 28 minutes into the game. Game number 2 is going straight over to Revival. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a series.
I am furious right now, Eric. That was one of the stupidest calls from a team I have ever seen at this level of competitive play. They send Olaf to go hit the Dragon while your opponents are trying to end the game. Even if you pick that up and lose the inhibitor, which they did, and they didn't get engaged upon, that trade is not worth it ever. And you saw like how brutal that was. They lost the game because they were able to get engaged upon. They don't have engaged tools. Their disengaged tools are okay at best. You have to have all 5 members there to go for a fight. Like, there are so many ways they could have played that better, and they picked the single worst way to play it, and I am pissed. Like, that was so bad. But I think they could still win, because these are easy mistakes to fix. It's just like, come on, guys.
Joshi, the secret lies in confusing the enemy so he cannot fathom our real intent. Yeah, that was a head scratcher to me. I mean, Winthrop were definitely still in that game. You got Oriana. She can do big things in a team fight, but I don't know. Trading objectives, Dragon for Nexus, I kind of don't think it's worth them. Just my expert opinion there.
I mean, there are so many lines that they could take. They could all go over there, hit the Dragon, kill it quickly, and then recall. Like, if you're going to commit to trading this Dragon for an inhibitor, that's probably the way to do it. Or you can just go back and try and save your inhibitor. But this is this big thing that I always look at. And, you know, it's part of why players like Aframu on Dignitas has been looking so good recently, is he is so decisive and the team trusts him when he makes these calls. And they're able to make plays that a lot of other teams wouldn't be able to do because they're all making decisive calls. They're all moving very deliberately. They're moving as a group. And while this call was like deliberate, they very clearly chose to go for the Dragon. They didn't decide that that's what they wanted and tried to go halfway on both objectives and ends up losing effectively both.
It really did hurt me to see, but it was a huge misstep on the side of Winthrop. It's definitely not indicative of their performance as a whole, so I still see this being as competitive, and especially after the last performance we've seen, I would call it Winthrop favorite. I am flipping even though Revival just won it. That being said, though, we do have to throw it over to a short break and see how this series concludes, but first, the Analyst Desk will join you right after the break to break down that match. We'll be right back.